Thanks for joining us. I'm Ian Whitworth from Scene Change, and welcome to Saxton Fireside Chats. This morning, thanks for joining us. We're bringing you some calm, objective science, perhaps to balance out the things your conspiracy theorist cousin posts each night on Facebook. And to do that, we have a calm, objective scientist and physician and broadcaster, producer, Walkley award-winning journalist. His Corona Cast podcast has had 2 million downloads over March. It's far and away the number one podcast in the country. So, Dr. Norman Swan, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Ian.
I'm assuming your life at the moment is a bit like a school holiday trip in a car with the kids in the back, and they're just going, when's it over? When's it over? When's it over?
Well, that's right. At least a school holiday trip, you eventually get to the beach.
There is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there was a point 4.5 months ago in Wuhan province when there was only one person with what would become known as COVID-19, just one person. And as we speak today, there's over 2 million people who've been infected and well over 120,000 people who've died. It's extraordinary. 4.5 horrible months, and it just keeps on going. It's an extraordinary period, and it's a period in our lives that everybody will remember. We haven't had to experience this since 1918, but our ancestors experienced this all the time with plague and various other germs that would hit. The only thing that we could do in ancient times, as in now, when there's no treatment, no vaccine, is to socially distance ourselves, stay at home, keep away from others, try and dampen down the infection.
And so here we are on the couch at a respectable,
yes, I think we're
safe.
I think we're cool here.
Safe distance. So, we're at a position now where the government has to choose between lockdown until there's a cure or vaccine, effectively, or go for herd immunity, whatever exactly that is. What are the pros and cons and the probabilities of each of those?
Well, I think that the thinking needs to change, and I think it is changing in parts of government. State governments, I think, are thinking this way. Federal government's wobbling a little bit. But it doesn't have to be for months, because we have the advantage of being an island. We've closed our borders. So unless we open up our borders, we're not going to see, somebody arrives on a freight ship, a cargo ship, and with the virus, essentially we're not going to see any more cases from overseas. So assuming that the borders are closed for the foreseeable future, and that could be for quite a long time, then we actually have an opportunity in Australia to get rid of this virus completely. We could actually just get rid of it. We've got rid of foot and mouth disease, we get rid of animal diseases. We can use the fact that we are an island continent and get rid of this virus completely. That's what New Zealand's trying to do, and they're showing some success, and we could do it too. And if you look, as we speak today, if you look at the states like South Australia and Western Australia, they've almost eliminated the virus from those states. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's mind-bending to think about it. If Tasmania hadn't had that outbreak in Burnie, they'd be close to eliminating it. New South Wales and Queensland and Victoria have got a way to go, but we're at low numbers. And we could drive this down in the next few weeks to 0 or single-digit numbers where we're almost at 0 cases. If we let the foot off the brake now, we're never going to do it by herd immunity, by the way.
Okay.
Herd immunity is the mistake they made in Britain. And Britain, last time I looked, they had 10 or 15,000 deaths. So that's the price you pay for going for herd immunity. And after this epidemic is over in Britain, or while it dies down, there probably won't be any more than 15% of the 20% maybe of the British population that's been infected with coronavirus. That does not give you herd immunity. So they've sacrificed 10, 15, there'll be 20,000 lives before this is over, and they'll only get that. In Wuhan province in China, they've probably only got 1% herd immunity, and they've had a huge epidemic. New York State, maybe a bit more, but it won't be 60%. So a lot of people die on the way there. But we could actually drive it down and get rid of this virus. And once you got rid of the virus, if you've got good testing and widespread testing, like now they've got in New South Wales and Western Australia, where everybody with a cough and a cold gets tested, contact traced, isolated, quarantined if you've got the COVID-19 virus, and we're prepared to accept that, we could start, kids go back to school, people start going back to work, eventually restaurants, it's steady going back to normal. Probably unfortunately, for events organisers, it'll be a while before we have very large groups of people together. But we'll all, for our own personal lives, welcome the fact that we can start moving back to some semblance of normality.
When we say a while, so you say weeks for zero to insignificant.
New Zealand thinks they could hit it at the end of April, beginning of May. It depends on what modelling you look at for Australia. We could certainly hit it, and it depends on social distancing. The one and only effective means of doing this is social distancing, and it's been that way for hundreds of years. It's the only thing that shifts the dial. Now, if 7 out of 10 of us stick to so we're almost at lockdown in Australia already. There's not much more that we could do.
Yep.
We could stop people going for a run in the park and things like that, but that would be ridiculous. So if 70% of people comply with what they've been asked to do, the numbers keep on going up. If 80% comply, the numbers start to go down. And if 9 out of 10 of us comply, they really start going down. So at 80% compliance, we could, one model says end of June, but it could actually be sooner than that because we're doing really well. The Australian community, public, have really risen to this. Yep, 20 to 29-year-olds are chafing at it and they're going off for their surfing and so on, and there's a limit to how much we can do that. But we could really see something happening, I think, by mid-May.
What if they sort of go, okay, it's time to loosen off, but then it gets worse? Do you think people will be willing to knuckle down yet again, or is it once they get out of the gate?
That's why we need to go for elimination,
yeah.
Because it reduces the risk of a second wave. At 40 or 50 cases a day, which is what we've got at the moment, remember I said, one person in Wuhan province just 4.5 months ago. So every day we add 50 people to the number of people who are infected, and they stay infected for a couple of weeks. So it's 50, 100, 200. There's a pool of people in the community who are infected who can spread it to others. But if we get down to 1 or 2 or none, then we are really in good shape to actually let our foot off the brake. But if we do it now, which is the pressure is on to do it now, we will have a second wave. And it could be nasty, and it'll be very hard to ask people to go back to where they were. Imagine, you've got a restaurant, you rehire your casual staff, and then you say, oh, made a mistake, better shut it down again, which is what will happen.
Let's talk vaccines and cures. Take us through realistically how long it takes to develop a vaccine so people don't get their hopes up too much. What's the process you go through to develop?
Well, the process with a vaccine is that there was a competition a little while ago, I can't remember exactly how long ago, where there was a prize given, a grant given for researchers around the world to develop new technologies where if there was a pandemic, so this pandemic is not a surprise. Yep. People knew there was another pandemic coming. There's always emerging diseases. So what they did was they said, develop technologies which can produce a vaccine within 16 weeks. The University of Queensland here in Australia won one, and there's about 70 groups around the world who have developed technologies for developing a vaccine very quickly. The challenge here is that medical science has never developed an effective vaccine for an upper respiratory virus. And that's because the immune system doesn't work very well in the upper respiratory tract. They've tried to develop a vaccine for the common cold for years, and the common cold is a coronavirus, a cousin to this virus.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
It's on the team Corona.
Yep, coronavirus. Okay. It's not research into coronavirus is not new, and so they have. And the problem is that the immunity to the virus does not necessarily last a long time. Getting the right immunity, the right antibodies that are going to attack the virus, is difficult. And in 2002, 2003, they developed a vaccine to SARS-1, the first version of this virus, and they developed effective antibodies from the vaccine, but when they challenged monkeys who'd been immunized with the real virus, they got an overreaction in their immune system, which is similar to the overreaction that kills you with COVID-19. So safety is a huge issue. Look, there are so many technologies out there at the moment. One may pay off, but we shouldn't hang our hat on 12 to 18 months. But coming to cure or control, a treatment may come sooner. Lots of treatments being tried. And my suspicion is that we'll get a treatment of some kind before the end of the year. And a treatment will be a game changer. If you think about it, we've never got rid of Staphylococcus, which causes boils and sepsis in hospitals. We've never got rid of Streptococcus that gives us a sore throat. Those bacteria still exist, but we've got antibiotics. And before World War II, those bugs used to kill us. And now they don't kill us because we've got antibiotics. HIV is the same. There's no immunization against HIV, but we've got very effective drugs that suppress the virus, suppress it to the extent that they stop the virus being infectious to other people at low levels. So a treatment could control this, and if it controls it and people don't die of it, we can go back to life as normal, and it becomes yet another virus that gives us a bad flu. At the moment, it's a virus that gives us the bad flu and kills us, a proportion of us. So the treatment is really something to hang out for, and it's much more plausible in the near term, I think, than a vaccine.
Because like the drugs they're looking at, which there's the anti-malarial one, the HIV one, because they've been at least tested to not have bad side effects, yeah? So,
well, no. So the hydroxychloroquine, which President Trump's been pushing, is an anti-malarial, but it's also used in autoimmune diseases like systemic lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and another disease called sarcoidosis. So it's been used in various diseases because it suppresses the immune system. Right. So what kills you in COVID-19 is your immune system becomes overreactive and attacks your lungs and your heart and other organs. So the idea is if you could suppress the immune system, you could actually make it less fatal. And that's why they're using hydroxychloroquine. The problem with hydroxychloroquine is that it has side effects, and one of the side effects is on the heart. And what happens when you've got COVID-19, it does attack the heart, and it makes you more liable to fatal heart rhythms. Your heart can just quiver rather than beat. And hydroxychloroquine can make that worse. So the question is whether the cure is worse than the cold. But there are other drugs. The HIV drugs are not working very well, but there's another drug called remdesivir, which is a drug developed by Gilead, a pharmaceutical company, which may have some effect on coronavirus, and they're testing that. There's anti-blood pressure drugs that may help you with this. And even there's been a lot of negative publicity about ibuprofen, the anti-inflammatory drug, saying it might make it worse. But in fact, there's a cousin of ibuprofen that may actually have antiviral effects. So there's a lot around, and something's going to come out of that.
That'd be nice. So this is a very, we've had a storm of questions come in even pre the show, so we're basically just going to go into Q&A mode now. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the Zoom chat. And if you could just write the word question on there, because it gets a bit hard to read them here on the stage. Question from, we've had pre-registered questions. There's mixed interpretation about some of the social distancing rules and what constitutes essential outings. What advice to the community around how we should be making smart decisions in the interest of our own personal health and safety, but also to stop community transition?
Well, the more you go out, the more you mix with other people, the more chance you've got to spread it to other people or catch it from other people. And the problem with this virus is that 50% of the spread comes from people who don't know they've got it. Either they're about to get it, or they've got no symptoms, or when they do get it, they get no symptoms at all, or very few. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to have either no symptoms or very few symptoms. But you're still infectious. Maybe half as infectious as people who've got serious infection, but nonetheless, you're still infectious. So the more we mix, the more chances you are of coming across somebody, even when the virus is at low levels in the community. There's far more virus in the community, by the way, than the new cases tell you, because we're not doing widespread testing, so we don't really know that yet. So the message is, the more you go out, the less in control we are. And so this social distancing is really important, but this distance is probably not enough if you're going near a jogger, for example, because joggers are breathing deeply and they're expelling, so you probably want 3 or 4 meters difference if you're going past a jogger. And
I've never liked being that close to them.
No, they're very dangerous
Pre-virus, yeah.
And so you've got to give them a wide berth, and they've got you. And if you're jogging, you've got to give people a really wide berth, much more than the 2 meters. You've got to get exercise, and you've got to get out. But if we maintain that, and grandparents and parents, elderly parents, they've got to be protected as well. So coming in contact with kids and others is a problem for them. They've got to be isolated because they're at risk of dying. if they get the disease, much more so than younger people. And we've just got to maintain that social distancing and the rules, and only going into work if we're in an essential occupation, and trying as hard as much as possible to work from home. And there are lots of people breaking the rules, but there are lots of people keeping to them as well.
So if you're, say, in the supermarket aisle, is it safe to walk past someone else in the supermarket? Like, how is it? Are we clear on how it's actually transmitted? Is it?
Yeah, we're very clear on how it's transmitted. The commonest way is droplets in the air. Come in close contact with somebody, they breathe out, and there's droplets in the air which you can't see, and you pick them up and you catch them. Now, in theory, it's extended contact, but that's the theory.
No.
And so it's true that most of the infections in other parts of the world have come from families and family clusters. And so if that close environment where a child brings it into the house and it spreads, and then the family cluster spreads, family home. So it's that close contact, droplets. Then less likely, but still there and real, is from surfaces. So the droplets land on a surface with the virus in them. Oh, by the way, if you sneeze or cough, you get this explosive turbulent air which leaves your mouth and can go for about 8 meters. 8 meters.
8.
8. And in a very short space of time. And the virus particles live in that cloud for quite a while, possibly up to an hour. So that's why, wearing masks in public, although at the beginning of the epidemic we said don't do it because we didn't have enough masks for first responders, for doctors and nurses. But certainly the idea in wearing masks out in public is that it's not to protect you from catching it from somebody else. It's actually, you might have it, not know it, and masks will help to prevent you from passing it on to other people.
An 8-meter sneeze cloud is a horrifying image.
It is, yeah. There's video of it.
Okay. What about question, do you need to wash your fruit and vegetables, speaking of surfaces, after buying them from the supermarket?
Yeah, I think on rough surfaces, soft surfaces, the virus probably only in a viable way lasts a few hours, maybe a day at the most. So I think that you can be overly anxious, I think, about fruit and veg. If you really want to do it, you wash the external surface in soap and water, or when you peeled it, you wash your hands and sanitize. But probably just prudent washing of fruit and vegetables the way you would normally do is enough.
Okay, that's a relief. Are we still okay with sending children to school as an essential worker? That picture, that question just vanished off my screen. But anyway, let's just leave the first half. Schools, are they okay?
It's a huge question. And there's kind of no right or wrong answer here. Whichever decision you make is a problem. The spread from children contributes probably 2 or 4%, between 2 and 4% of the deaths from COVID-19, and they contribute about 10% of the spread of the virus. So it's not a big part of it. When it's influenza, they're a much bigger part of the spread than they are with COVID-19. So if you're really going to hard lockdown, you close schools, because even though it's a small contributor, it's a significant contributor. I mean, there's huge debate amongst this, and different states have different things. If you open up schools, the risk to your own child, by the way, is low. So if, let's say the child catches COVID-19 at school, most kids have a very, very mild illness. They're not going to get sick by it, but they do bring it home. So there's no question about that. If schools open, they're going to have to open with social distancing. They're going to have to open with major hand hygiene. They're going to have to open, probably, in my view, testing the temperature of parents when they're bringing the kids through. Parents have got to be responsible and say if they're not feeling well, the child doesn't come to school. And so school becomes very different from the way it is normally. And probably, if you're really being prudent, masks as well for the kids. That's the way schools can probably open up, with homeschooling online for other families. So I think Victoria's gone the way that it's going to go to homeschooling. Other states are saying, well, we'll keep schools open for parents who have to send their children, but if you don't want to, then we'll provide facilities for them to be schooled at home. it's a difficult decision because it affects families hugely.
Yeah, yeah. Question from Lachlan. After this is contained, I can imagine us becoming germaphobes and much more conscious of hygiene. Does this mean our resistance to other bugs and infections will fall dramatically? Or on the flip side of that, will it just be good that we're all just much less dirty?
Well, I think it's going to be good for lots of things, particularly people don't realize that food poisoning is a huge cause of illness in Australia and a very significant cause of death. And the very fact that we are being more hygienic will mean that food poisoning becomes less prevalent in Australia. And that would be a terrific thing. And there's no such thing really as immunity to food poisoning. And that would be a great thing, that we're much more obsessive about our food, how we cook food, and so on. And that'd be a fantastic thing moving forward, is that there'll be much less food poisoning. And yeah, we're probably going to have a mild flu season this year because we are socially distancing, because that's a solution for influenza as well. But the thing about influenza is that it changes every year. So next year we're going to be, the fact that you didn't get flu this year is not going to make much of a difference to flu next year. And anyway, we should all be getting immunized against flu.
So it's just as important to get your flu shots now?
It's more important than ever, actually.
Okay. It's funny, when this whole thing started with Corona, before the seriousness of it became apparent, they would interview scientists and medical professionals about what to do. And they would just go, what they've always done with everything like this since the dawn of time, they just go, wash your hands, you dirty buggers.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it's taken this to finally get hand washing to be popular.
Yeah, and the thing to remember here is that, and people must know this by now, is that soap is more effective than hand sanitizer, because soap breaks down the fat around the virus and kills the virus. But hand sanitizer is fine as long as it's 70% alcohol. But old-fashioned soap and water work.
This segment brought to you by Saxton's soap, cleans hands whiter and cleaner. Get your orders in online. What do you think about the different ways different countries and governments have been responding to the virus? Who's communicated the facts well? Who's taken the best preventative actions?
The countries that have done best are countries that experienced SARS in 2002, the SARS one, which was there was a lot of deaths from that. Maybe 9 or 10% of people died with SARS, so much more than COVID-19. COVID-19 is between 1% and 3%, depending on who you ask and where you look. So most countries in the world were well prepared, including Australia, for an influenza pandemic. And the way you deal with an influenza pandemic is very different from this COVID-19 for a couple of reasons. First of all, this one's far more fatal than seasonal flu. Second reason is it spreads to more people. So each person who's infected with this virus can spread it to 2 or 3 others. And in very densely populated circumstances, maybe as many as 6 others. So this is a highly infectious virus. And the countries that experienced SARS in 2002, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, responded to this very differently. Because the way you respond to influenza is you watch and see what happens. You might close schools first, and if that doesn't work, then you go to social distancing and you ramp it up. Whereas with SARS, you go hard, and you go hard early, because you know that this is highly contagious and it's going to spread to lots of people quickly. And so Taiwan is the poster child for this. They used data, they linked data. If you got off a plane in Taipei, they knew where you'd been, they knew your health history, they could put people into channels, they're testing widely. And I think Taiwan, with the same population as Australia, has had 400 cases.
Always be an island.
Yeah.
That's the go. What about Sweden's relaxed approach? How's that going?
Well, that's coming back to bite them now, because they've got a rise in cases. And wherever they've had a relaxed approach, it's fine. Singapore had a relatively relaxed approach. They were doing lots of testing, but not much social distancing, and they've had a rise in cases. And they're now clamping down. Restaurants are closed. Everybody's wearing a mask outside. And just going to your question earlier, very hard to reinstitute measures when you haven't instituted them before.
Cat out of the bag, as it were.
Yeah. So Singapore is chasing their tail.
Yeah. So does that just mean international Australia cut off from other countries until there's a cure?
Most countries have done that, but it's much harder when you've got land borders. I mean, Singapore is an island with one land bridge to Malaysia, so they could close the border really quite effectively. New Zealand, us, Britain even can do it. So if you're an island and you can really close off, but land borders, if you're France, if you're Spain, Italy, Austria, Germany, really hard to do.
Yeah. What sort of industries do you think will be able to open first?
Well, I think with the statistics that this doesn't spread a lot from schools. I think schools will tend to go back earlier.
Yep.
I think it'll be a while before universities go back, because that 20 to 29 year group is they're the ones who are infecting the rest of the population. They're a really highly, they spread it a fair bit more than children. I think that restaurants and cafes may go back sooner because they can socially distance, fewer customers around. I think it'll be a long time before you get bars. I think, unfortunately, a long time before you get events like football and so on. And I think then people just going back to work, regular work, going into offices, moving around, getting back to some semblance of normality, that would start happening. So it's not just essential occupations. But each time you let it up, the right way to do this is do one thing at a time, wait a couple of weeks, see what happens. If there's no uptick, then do something else, see what happens. If there's no uptick. So it's almost the reverse of influenza, where you ramp it up slowly. Here we ramp it down really slowly and watch as we go. But, if we've got very little virus in the country, it could happen quite quickly.
We seem to have handled it quite well. Could you suggest that Australia should be permanently governed by a sort of committee of the federal government and the states?
Well, that's what some of the premiers are asking for, is that this national cabinet replaces COAG, because it's working quite well together. I mean, they do have differences of opinion.
Yes.
The states are out in front of the Commonwealth in terms of their what they're doing. So in Victoria, they're keeping the schools shut. Victoria's doing a great job of lockdown, and hopefully you will start to see those numbers really dropping dramatically in Victoria. New South Wales isn't that bad, but our schools are remaining open, I think, in New South Wales. So it'll vary from state to state, but it seems to be working quite well.
It does. And so how will people be changed by this, both in day-to-day behaviour and mentally when all this is over? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the memory will live with us. I think that we'll appreciate our friends and family. We'll savour social events, and hopefully we won't forget to savour them as we're having them. I mean, I remember right at the beginning of this, being out at dinner before social distancing happened, looking around the dinner table thinking, people around this table have no idea what's about to happen and how precious just having people around to dinner is. And I think we'll just savour that, appreciate it. Our kids, if they're old enough, they'll remember it too. I think you're right that we'll be more aware of hygiene, more aware of infection, and we'll probably put in place better processes, because this is not going to be the last pandemic. There will be an influenza pandemic sometime, and there will be another coronavirus epidemic. Coronavirus was top of the list of new epidemics. There will be another one, but we should use this time to get ready for the next one.
Seems like a good plan. We do have a lot of people in the audience who are in the event field, so the elephant in the room, as it were, from MIA. That's MIA first name, not MIA, the association. Realistically, if taking an educated guess, when can we expect local domestic events with over 100 people to start back up?
If we eliminate the virus, this is why it's really important. If we eliminate the virus and we let our foot off the brake and nothing much happens, then I think, and let's say 2 or 3 months go by and people have got back to work, restaurants have opened, and it's still staying low, and we accept as a community very invasive testing regimes, and we accept as a community, if you've got a cold, you go and get tested, and if we see a colleague with a cold, they go and get tested, and if it's COVID-19, they've got to accept that for the next 2 weeks they're isolated and their contacts are traced. And if we accept that as the price to pay for some freedom, then I think, after 3 months of no infections, people can start to get together again in larger numbers, because you can reasonably assume there's no virus.
3 months would be better, frankly, than I was expecting.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about 3 months after you let your foot off the brake, not 3 months from now, but
Okay.
3 months. So I'm assuming September, October, if you've still got no virus there, I think we can start letting, because there's no, there'll be no play. It should have washed through the system by then, and really we can get back to some, much more normal, much greater sense of normality.
Speaking of prices to pay, there's government talk of tracker apps that track everyone to see if you've been near people, which they will of course say, and we won't retain any of the data. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think that we should all subscribe to those apps. I think that we need to give up some personal freedom for control. Look how much personal freedom we are giving up. We're stuck at home. We're going nuts with the kids. Kids aren't going to school. The economy's collapsed. That's a lot of personal freedom to have lost. For me, the slight risk of loss of privacy, I'll be the first to sign up to a tracker. They can find out wherever I go. I don't care. Because if that's the price for controlling this virus so that we can all get back to normal and regain some of our freedom, it's great. And then you can always turn it off in 6 months' time.
Terrific. Well, look, we will end it there because you're a very busy man. Would even you have predicted that one day you would add to your CV the face of coronavirus?
Never.
Perhaps when it becomes a Pixar movie, you could voice it.
Yeah, I'd be much happier if there'd been no coronavirus.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Dr. Norman Swan, thanks for joining us.
Welcome you.